a Northern Irish girl, very young girl, who couldn't get abortion because you can only get abortion in Northern Ireland for very restricted.
Basically, less the mother's life is at risk. As a result of the
so she came to England. She had to pay for it, although she was also partly funded at some point.
Yes, by the Abortion Support Network.
And you took this to the High Court.
Yes.
You know, and then. You know, what happened? Tell us more about that particular case. I mean, it was in the news everywhere. Really,
yes,
really
I mean, I was quite surprised at the, the level of interest. And it's, I think that most lawyers throughout their careers may only have a handful of cases that attract such national coverage.
The lawyer that I'm interviewing today is a partner, the head of civil liberties and human rights at Maxwell Gillott, which is part of the national law firm Simpson Miller. She has been recognised as a leading expert in education and community care law and has been involved in widely reported cases, including a successful judicial review case involving an 11-year-old African Caribbean boy who was excluded on his first day at secondary school back in 2009 because he wore his hair in cornrows. The High Court ruled that the school's policy resulted in indirect racial discrimination. In 2014, she acted for a young pregnant girl from Northern Ireland who was denied an abortion on the National Health Service in England in circumstances where the abortion would have been available to her on the NHS if she had been from England. She graduated in law from Balliol College, University of Oxford, and qualified as a solicitor in 1987. In 2009, she received an award for outstanding achievement at the Legal Aid Practitioners Group Silver Jubilee Award ceremony and was named the Times Lawyer of the Week in July 2011. She's also a visiting lawyer at the Birkbeck University. She's widely respected for her work and has been described as razor sharp. The person I'm of course interviewing today is Angela Jackman. Welcome, Angela, to the BLD interview.
Thank you.
Angela, in fact, the first question we normally ask is, what was your first ever job?
My first ever job? So when I was 15, I was very excited to land myself a Saturday job. And it was with British Home Stores. So
VHS.
It was my first job ever.
Okay.
It was VHS. In terms of the lead, or do you really want to ask me about the legal?
No, really, the VHS job.
Really?
Very interesting. Yes. What was it? What did you do?
Oh dear, it was ghastly. I was placed on the lighting department on a Saturday, which was fairly hard going. And then I was placed on the toy department as it was leading up to Christmas. And that particular year, that play product called Slime was in, so I had lots of excited children throwing slime all over the place, and very loud musical toys going off, constantly.
So it's kind of preparation for law, I suppose. Lights, camera, action. I suppose long way of patience. Yes. So why did you decide to become a lawyer then?
From about the age of 13, when I was at school, I was invited to take part in the public speaking group, and I did take part in competitions, and I really enjoyed, in a sense, being in the spotlight and giving forth and debating. I enjoyed subjects such as, I think I did British government and politics as one of my options. And I was very much influenced by an older sister who was very, very active on the political scene in Leicester, which is where I was born and grew up. So I very much became involved in her political circles, debating issues, and somehow I just decided that I thought I'd be interested in studying law and having access to debating issues and challenging and looking to change things for the better.
Did your school encourage all that?
Yes, I went to a girls' grammar school, and I was very fortunate, I feel, because I was very lucky to be taught by teachers who had expectations, who were supportive, high expectations, who were encouraging, and who expected me to do well. And I also was very fortunate to have those same values and support at home as well.
Good, excellent. So I know you're now the head of civil liberties and human rights at your firm.
Yes.
So why this area of law? What really prompted you? I mean, you're a legal expert in terms of education law and community care work. So what is the interest?
So I suppose my interests and practices have evolved. So in the olden days, as it were, training contracts were called articles. So I moved to London in '85, and I spent 2 years practicing in terms of being an article clerk, now referred to as a trainee solicitor. I was very privileged to have articles with Jill Butler, who I always hail and respect, because she, I feel, was very much my way into paving a way in the legal profession. And her areas of practice were family and children's law, and at that period of time, lesbian custody disputes were pretty vitriolic and dreadful in terms of women losing their children as a result of their evolving sexuality. So as a trainee, I was fortunate to be working in an area that was politicised and that was kind of novel and fairly cutting edge, and very possibly that's one of the reasons why that's in a sense been my approach to.
In fact, I remember at the time, it could be, there was a handbook, it was quite groundbreaking, the Lesbian Mother's Handbook at that time.
Through Rights of Women.
Groundbreaking.
Yes, and my heroine, Jill Butler, spearheaded that movement. Right. So I was fortunate to be trained by Jill for 2 years. I covered areas which included some housing, some immigration, and I also enjoyed conveyancing in Wilson.
Oh my goodness!
I actually really enjoyed it.
I thought I was I
actually enjoyed the procedural side to it, and having a very clear outcome after going through a process. And during my training, I was a volunteer at the then North Lewisham Law Centre. So I used to go along in the evenings and take part in advice sessions. And decided that once I qualified, and I stayed on for a while because it was a property boom in '87. So I stayed on in the conveyancing and wills and probate department until I secured a post in a law centre. And that law centre was Hackney Community Law Centre.
Is that where you got your interest really?
Yes.
In terms of education law?
In terms of education,
and community care. Yes.
Again, I was very lucky to join the law centre with someone called Marsha Prescott. Was there. She was practicing education law. So my first experience of dealing with exclusion was because Marsha was already bringing those cases. My very first governing body exclusion hearing, my first independent appeal panel hearings were in the early days at Hackney Community Law Centre. And at the time, law centres were focusing on areas such as housing law and also evolving into community care law. I left Hackney Law Centre eventually so that I could specialise in education and community care, because whilst at the law centre the focus was very much immigration and asylum, which was my other main area at the time, and I didn't really have the scope to do as much education as I wished to. I wanted to really specialise in it. So an opportunity came up to...
How long ago was that?
When I left the law centre.
When you decided to specialise in education law?
It would have been in the late 90s, yes. I had my first reported case I'm very proud of was in 1994. Right, okay. And that established that the rules of natural justice.
Okay, we're in 2014, so 10 years later.
Should apply to exclusion hearings.
Fantastic. So, I mean, since then you've had some landmark cases actually. More recently in 2014, the case of Re A and B,
yes.
A Northern Irish girl, very young girl, who couldn't get abortion because you can only get abortion in Northern Ireland for very restricted.
Basically, unless the mother's life is at risk as a result of
so she came to England, she had to pay for it, although she was also partly funded somewhat.
Yes, by the Abortion Support Network.
And you took this to High Court,
yes.
You know, and then. You know, what happened? Tell us more about that particular case. I mean, it was in the news everywhere. Really, really
I was quite surprised at the the level of interest, and it's I think that most lawyers throughout their careers may only have a handful of cases that attract such national coverage, unless they're lucky enough, I guess, to be working at firms that constantly bring those cases. But it was quite an amazing day. Judgment was handed down, and I went along to the High Court, and I was interviewed over the course of about an hour and a half. I probably gave about 6 or 7 interviews. So
included by the BBC.
Yes, so it was live BBC, and then straight live dial into the Victoria Derbyshire 5 Live programme. It was pouring with rain on the day in question, and some cameramen were holding a big umbrella over me, and I was advised that I would be kind of switched into the debate that was happening, because the press seemed to have gone quite wild when the judgment was handed down. And Victoria Derbyshire was quite testing, quite challenging. But I felt very strongly about the case, and I continue to feel very strongly about the case. And because I think that women in Northern Ireland are part of the UK. I was challenged by Victoria Derbyshire, who took the view that really this is a challenge to the abortion laws in Northern Ireland, isn't it? And why are you bringing a challenge against the Secretary of State for Health in England? I wasn't instructed to bring a challenge against the abortion laws per se, and I'm sure that challenge will be brought at some point. But I, am acting for clients who wanted to challenge the very traumatic, the exacerbation of the traumatic circumstances that they found themselves in, and it's very, very wrong. I feel that it's that abortion is unlawful in Northern Ireland, and in England the rationale for the Secretary of State refusing to give directions or to give guidance around giving abortions on the NHS, even if it's in very restricted circumstances. But during the course of the litigation, the Secretary of State confirmed that there's a policy, and that policy is that because the service would be unlawful if received in Northern Ireland, then they're not going to fund it over here on the NHS. And it seems to me quite irrational, because the whole reason why you're asking the Secretary of State to exercise discretion and to have flexibility and not to have such a rigid blanket policy is because of the very difficult circumstances, because of the legal status of abortion still in Northern Ireland. We also raised issues around Article 8 and Article 14.
Right to family life and
private life, more private life. Article 8 is both discrimination, because women in that position are discriminated against because on the basis of residence, because they happen to be within the UK but living in Northern Ireland rather than in England.
Currently I know it was unsuccessful in the High Court. So what is the position now?
I'm awaiting a decision in the Court of Appeal.
For leave to Court of Appeal. And well, don't want to prejudge anything, but who knows? May well run all the way to European Court. You never know.
And that would be the intention. If we continue to feel that we have sufficient merits, and subject to funding, and it's there's been quite a lot of public interest in the case, and most of it's been very supportive.
And how did you get involved in the case?
The case was referred to me by a barrister who was kind of connected to
because of your expertise, obviously.
Yes.
Great, excellent. There's another case of yours actually that is very well known too. It's about free schools.
Yes.
There's been a lot about free schools.
Yes.
And there was a parent who acted for the case the case of Patricia Johnson as the mother, and a school was set up to help black boys.
I'll just to clarify that. The idea of the school proposals was to set up a school for disadvantaged boys, and because of where they intended to locate the school, which is in the London borough of Lewisham, a sizable percentage of the boys who would benefit from the educational provision would be.
So it's not exclusively for black boys, but by implication of where it is, a lot of the beneficiaries will be black boys.
Yes, right. And also a lot of interest had been expressed by members of the African Caribbean community because it's been a long-standing issue in terms of underachievement of African Caribbean boys in particular in the education system. You know, historically, disproportionate numbers of African Caribbean boys, again in particular, being excluded from schools, has meant that it's been a really important issue for the community from since I was growing up.
Absolutely, I mean, there's a lot of that in terms of statistics.
And it hasn't changed. So, understandably, many parents are looking for options and alternatives. So there was a fairly broad base of support for.
So they applied to the Secretary of State, the former Secretary of State, Michael Gove, who's now left the position last week.
That's correct.
And he rejected it.
Yes,
on what grounds?
There are a number of grounds that were given. When I was instructed, it was the third refusal, and there had been quite a lot of support for the school proposers, particularly by the Independent newspaper and also by the Voice newspaper.
And I understand a lot of employers have even come on board in terms of
they
working
were very
with
well
school.
supported. Yes. In fact, I first read about the case because a tutor at Cambridge who was a governor or proposed governor of the school diaspora was speaking very publicly about it and expressing his concerns that he felt it was very unfair how the project and the proposers were being treated. So there was a position whereby this could have been a really good facility and resource for young boys. You know, I'm still acting for parents where their sons are being excluded from an early stage and where it can be very difficult to secure successful returns.
So you can see the benefit for those kids in setting up this school, albeit just in Lewisham. At least you can see the benefit.
Absolutely.
Where a lot of these boys are being excluded, you thought, well, this is a good thing to happen.
Yes. So. And what I would have expected was that if there were concerns about the application submitted by the proposers, I would have expected the Department for Education to have a more supportive approach. And when there was further delving about the process, there were genuine concerns that the department had really not engaged as much as it should have done, and it was felt to be appropriate to ask probing questions based under the Equality Act and to what extent there had been sufficient steps to try to deal with inequality issues. And what was quite useful and helpful during the course of the litigation, there was actually a very, very supportive report published by a national charity called ROTA, Race on the Agenda. I don't know if you have heard of them.
No.
I received their mailings and have done for a while, but I've had no contact with anybody in the organisation. And I think it was just before the Secretary of State was due to file a summary response and evidence. I was amazed to receive an email attaching a report undertaken by ROTA dealing with this very, very same issue around lack of adequate engagement.
The evidence found you.
Exactly, yes. In a sense, yes.
Yes. And it's interesting how you got involved, so you read about it and that's how you got involved. So what's the current position about this case?
We settled, and there was an article in the Times online in July last year which referred to the settlement, and basically we were refused permission on the papers, so we had an oral renewal in March 2013 before Mr. Justice Leggett, and it didn't take very much at all to persuade him that there were clearly arguable issues around the extent to which the public sector equality duties had or had not been complied with. And following that hearing, the Secretary of State filed and served lots of evidence which revealed for the first time that they had made fairly significant adjustments to the application process So there'd been training was now being provided to assessors. They had templates so that assessors had to actively engage and think about public sector equality issues, and there was a witness statement filed, so it's in the public domain, in which it was very clearly stated by a Department of Education official that adjustments had been made to the free school application process in consequence of the judicial review.
Fantastic. So you've changed the position, you've changed the government. So what's the position about the school? Has it been set up?
They are taking steps to provide a facility, not in the same way that they wish to, but there are
steps in the right way. Good. Just moving away for a minute, but this still relates to what you do. Would it be fair to say a lot of what you do is publicly funded, legally aided work?
That's correct, yes.
So, I mean, it's everywhere.
It's very challenging.
About cuts in legal aid. How has that affected you? In three ways, really. As a practitioner.
Yes.
And you're also a partner in the law firm, as a businesswoman, really. And for your clients also in terms of access to justice. If you can just tell me, you know.
Well, as a practitioner, it's been affecting us for a while, really. Sadly, many good providers have had to leave the market. So, for example, in education law, there was a tendering process last year, which has meant that very, very good practitioners, who in my view should still be in the field, who should still be providing high quality services, are no longer able to practice education law and act for clients.
It's not feasible for them financially.
Not through, well, certainly not through legal aid or public funding. So it has meant that some good quality providers have fallen out of the,
does that mean they're more overwhelmed by work?
It does,
because
mean
people are beating your door because it's one of the few still left standing.
Yes, in terms of public funding, yeah. So as the current position is that the Legal Aid Agency, or Ministry of Justice, provides funding to 3 firms
in the whole country.
3 providers.
Of which you're one of them.
We're one of them. Yes.
Wow.
So really, it does mean that there's
you get people from all over the country, from Northern Ireland, from wherever.
Very high demand for services, yes.
So you're very busy, but
very busy, yes.
How is your business? Because how are you able to survive? Because you have a business to run at the end of the day to pay your bills.
Yes.
So in terms of the legal aid cut, how is that affecting?
Well, increasingly legal aid providers have had to do a mix. Practice
because you can't be solely legal aid practice.
So all practitioners, or most practitioners who predominantly or largely provide publicly funded services, also have to provide, privately funded
to subsidise
as well.
Legal aid work.
I wouldn't say to subsidise, but you have to have different income streams. It's never a good idea, as most people would know, to have all of your eggs in one basket.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
So it is about having different income streams and being mindful of that, marketing and being very watchful.
Yeah.
And keeping ahead of the times as well, because also the way that we practice now is very different to how we practiced
tell me about it.
10, 15 years ago with social media and different ways of marketing and so on.
Sure. What about the clients? What about the access to justice itself in terms of the cut? How are you finding that? What's happening? What are they saying?
There are many people who are struggling because in terms of education, for example, certain areas under which we could advise eligible clients are now out of scope. So legal help is no longer available in education cases unless there are issues connected to special educational needs or disability discrimination. So, for example, if a pupil is excluded from school and there are no special educational needs or disability discrimination issues, if the pupil and the parents are looking for advice, help and representation around governing body meeting or independent review panel, legal aid is not available.
So there was a case you did some years back, 2011 I think, about the young boy
Yes.
who was excluded from school, from first day in secondary school. He was 11,
Yes.
because he had his hair cornrows.
Yes.
So that kind of case, you couldn't take that on now. Is that what you're saying? Because no,
that's a judicial review. So there's two forms of legal aid. So legal help is for the initial work for advising. It's never covered representation, but for advising parents and young people preparing their cases for governing body or independent review panel, that would be legal help. But if it's a judicial review and high court proceedings, then it's publicly funded, which is not restricted in the same manner.
Anyway, just good to know you're one of the few still standing and doing very well on that. Just to sort of change things slightly about career choices, what was the best and the worst career advice you were ever given?
Well, the worst was probably when I was about 13. I went to a parents' evening with my mother, and we went to see the careers officer, because in those days when you had parents' evening, the teachers were scattered around on desks, and there was the careers advisor. Very different. So we went to see the careers advisor, and he asked me what I wanted to do, what did I think I wanted to do, and I said, oh, I think I want to be a lawyer. And he was, I think you may have been at a talk that I gave once at the Law Society. He was very, very shocked and felt it was necessary to inform me that law was a very hard subject. You have to work very, very hard, and was I sure? And you know, my mum was outraged, and she's still really outraged when she kind of remembers you know, the way that he responded. And
basically, don't be ambitious.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yes, you know, but because my family and parents always were very encouraging and supportive and believed in us, it actually didn't have any impact on me. You know,
just as well. So, what about the best?
The best advice. I suppose I've been very fortunate in terms of being able to diversify my practice over the years. So whilst I specialised in education and community care, I also, I think through working with various barristers in the kind of, from about 2005 onwards, mental capacity work and court protection work was very much an emerging area, and some of the community care barristers who I work very closely with, I think they referred a couple of cases to me and were very happy to advise and support me through those very first initial cases. And I'm very, very grateful for that, because it's now a large area of my practice. And it's very rewarding, it's very stimulating, and it's really, really vital for the client group.
Excellent. Okay. So what is the best career advice you would give to others?
I think it's about being focused, really researching what lies ahead for you, what the challenges are, the advantages and disadvantages, not to go into anything with rose-tinted glasses, but to know what the realities are for the particular discipline or profession that you're thinking about. Weighing that all up, getting some experience if you can. I've got a 16 going on 17-year-old daughter, so she's very much at the beginning of thinking about what she wants to do, and I've seen for myself just how important it is for young people of that age to get some work experience, because they may have no idea what they want to do, or they may have an idea but the reality is different. And I suppose that's just the very, very early example of what I think people need to be doing when they're thinking about career choices and they're not sure
what they want.
Get to know about it, get in there, get some experience, and once you've decided what you want to do, to just really focus on that and give 100%.
Just focus on your career now. What would you consider to be your professional high points or high points?
High points. I think two spring to mind, and it was the privilege of being given an award for outstanding achievement by the Legal Aid Practitioners Group.
I remember that night.
That was a really, really special evening.
I think was it the 10th anniversary, wasn't it?
It was the Silver Jubilee.
Yes, it was Silver Jubilee anniversary. That was great. Are there any other professional achievements you're hoping, or you still want, any things you're still thinking, yes, I'd like to nail that?
Well, we're all supposed to be thinking about becoming judges at some point. I'm open-minded.
Right, okay.
It's not something that I'm kind of desperately wishing to do necessarily in the next couple of years, but I'm open-minded about what the future might hold.
Diverse, judiciary, yes.
Yes, and that's really, really important, and it's not going to become diverse unless
people apply.
BAME lawyers do rise to the challenge and apply. Yes.
What about the person you most admire, dead or alive, and why?
I think it has to be Nelson Mandela, as I said before, for reasons that many others would give. When I was growing up, I remember being involved in the anti-apartheid movement to the extent that I could be as a teenager.
That's right.
I remember watching TV on the day when he was released.
Yes.
Just his wonderful focus on reconciliation and truth and binding a nation together as far as he could, despite the terrible atrocities that had happened. And having spent 25 years in terrible conditions, over 25 years, and to be so forgiving and thinking about his people and his country as a whole, putting their interests first. I just think he was just an absolute legend, as do many others.
So, comes to your passion and your likes. What are you most passionate and, or love or happiest about?
Happiest about. I liked what gives me great satisfaction is achieving good outcomes for my clients, especially very vulnerable clients. I find that very rewarding still, and it's the reason for doing the job.
Okay, what about dislikes?
Dislikes, just the constant challenges thrown at practitioners who are trying to provide a good service. We're not fat cat lawyers. There's no legal aids gravy train. We work under very pressurised circumstances and conditions, and it's just very frustrating to feel that there's always more and more obstacles being thrown in our way, whether it's yet more restrictions or challenges or cutbacks in terms of legal aid, or whether it's an assault on the ability to bring judicial review proceedings, so that individuals should quite rightly be in a position to challenge the state. Why on earth should they not have the ability to do so? And I think it's been very heartening that there have been successful judicial reviews very recently against some of the more worrying proposals of the government. So just last week we had a successful judicial review by the Public Law Project challenging the residence test. That in itself shows exactly why it's so important for people to have access to justice, for there to be a legitimate access to the court through judicial review without the curbs that are being proposed, and for public funding to be available.
Okay. Do you have any professional regrets?
Not that I think of. No. I mean, sometimes I used to think that it would have been quite good to have practiced, to have done more practice in terms of children's care proceedings, because whilst I had some experience of that as a trainee, I perhaps would have liked to have practiced more. So sometimes when I sat back and thought, well, what would I imagine myself doing if I wasn't practicing the protection, education and community care, then I think, well, what sits most comfortably with those areas would have been, care proceedings on children. But just fleeting thoughts.
Fleeting thoughts, but no regrets.
No regrets, no.
So final question. If you could rule the world for a day, just think of what would you do or change? Or
what would I change? Well, just with so many terrible things happening around us, just the awful, heartbreaking position from flight, MH17 coming down.
Yeah, well, Ukraine, yes, it's terrible.
Just the terrible position in Gaza, you know, and it sounds very idealistic, you know, to say that you'd want to stop all that terrible strife happening, but I think particularly today when these awful things are still, the repercussions of it all, reading about it just this morning in the newspapers, just, you know, it's very heartbreaking to think that there's so much pain and suffering happening.
So what are you going to do about
the world? So, you know, if I could wave a magic wand, it would all go away, but obviously that's very idealistic.
How are you going to, no, but how are you going to, when you wave the magic wand, what is it that you're going to change so that that stops happening?
People's perceptions and the way that individuals and countries deal with differences of opinions and strife and historical grievances. You know, there's no easy way of dealing with that at all. And it's very depressing, and it makes me feel very sad.
I have to say, I mean, listening to the news in the last week or two is just very depressing. Yes. Yeah. But I hope we can end on a very high note.
Yes, and say, nice sunny day.
Very nice. Angela, thank you so much.
You're welcome.